but maybe you'll learn something new in hearing it. So the IARPC is the Interagency Arctic Research Policy Committee, which is a federally mandated of the US government, but through our collaborations work, we've created a platform that Sarah's showing that's fully open to outside participation, a membership. We use it to share information with each other, post documents, and that type of thing, and post events, let people know about things like calls for abstracts. Our ultimate goal is to work on this 5-year research plan that Sarah's got centered right now. You can learn more about that and how it's been put together. This team in particular focuses on the observing part of the challenge, which is represented really by the bullseye in the center, along with other topics which we call environmental intelligence, the observing system, the systems modeling, the data integration, and really the convergence of stakeholder interests and needs around the kinds of things we produce out of our research. And so this team is the observing team. We meet once a month, and we work on a lot of different topics, but we've spent a lot of time over the last year working on societal benefit areas from different perspectives. So the international aspect of what we do is SAON, the Sustaining Arctic Observing Network process. Jan René Larsen, who is the executive secretary for SAON, is on the phone. This is where we kind of coordinate US activities in order to better coordinate internationally, but where we also explore things of critical importance to US priorities. And so we've used the 12 SAON Arctic societal benefits related to disaster preparedness, food security, weather and climate to help frame some of our conversations. And then sometimes we step back and just do some bigger picture work. So because we've been on an extended hiatus due to the shutdown and other things, we decided we wanted to do something a little bit more informal, catch people up on what's really actually been quite an active interval for the community who is interested in coordinated Arctic observing. And just to hear from you and say, yay team, we're back together and looking forward to 2019. So we're gonna, Sarah, unless there's something you want to add about the context of IARPC that I forgot, we'll start by inviting updates from the community. Okay, so hearing no, oops, I was going to say hearing no updates or hearing no corrections from Sarah, let's jump into updates. And I'm sorry that I talked on top of you.
No worries. This is Sally McFarlane. So I have two updates, one Arctic focused, one not. On the Arctic side, the atmospheric radiation measurement facility that I manage has just announced that we're accepting proposals for proposing instruments on our tethered balloon systems at Aliktak for the flights that we're doing this summer. So if people are interested, have instruments they're interested in flying on tethered balloons, let me know and I can give you more details about that. And then the non-Arctic announcement is that Dorothy Koch, the modeling program manager in our division at DOE, has recently announced that she is moving over to NOAA, actually. So we anticipate having an opening for a climate modeling program manager. So if anyone's interested in that, let me know. Thanks.
Any other updates from around the horn?
Hi, this is John Toole. I can give you a quick synopsis of what our 2019 fieldwork might be to deploy ice-tethered profilers. Looks like it's going to be a busy summer with 4 expeditions that we will man and deploy instruments. So there's I guess it's you pronounce it CATEX, C-A-A-T-E-X, expeditions, both one out of Svalbard and one out of in the west. There's the Bijos cruise will actually happen again this year. And then we're talking about putting people on the installation cruise of Fedorov that's setting up Polarstern for Mosaic. So there'll be a bunch of, hopefully a bunch of new instruments out there reporting very soon now.
John, that's great news to hear. Do you have any map-based resources or a website URL that you want to drop into the chat so folks can track what you're doing?
I don't.
Okay.
Maybe I can also add on something, because we are going to have this coordinated Arctic acoustic thermometry experiment from mid-August to beginning of or almost mid-September. We have the deployment cruise, and then the moorings will be out for a year. So there will be 3 moorings north of Svalbard and as far north that we can come. And then there will be 3 US moorings coming in from the other side. And there will be oceanographic instrumentation on all the moorings, as well as acoustic instrumentation, acoustic sources. So we will do trans-Arctic acoustic thermometry to compare to data from 99.
Yes, those are 2 of the 4 cruises, those that the CATEX thing that I mentioned.
I think it's quite nice because it is US, Canada, and Norway, and also it is coordinated with what will happen also on Polarstern during the Mosaic expedition.
Right, and the Canada Basin side, that cruise is also part of the SODA program that the ONR is supporting.
Mm.
Great, thanks. Any other updates?
Hi, I may add that we are doing in Interos now a final synthesis of the assessment of the existing Arctic observing system, mostly focusing on the European side. And we are kind of listing, it's a synthesis, so we are making a list now of the major observing system that we didn't include in our previous assessment of our previous report. And because we would like to have an overview of the whole Arctic domain, not just Europe. Although we had already included some not European observing systems on pan-Arctic observing system, but we want to see what is missing, and so we are making now the list of the most important systems that are missing, and then we would like to contact the manager of those systems. Many of them will be in the United States. To ask them to answer some questions, to fill a questionnaire, so that we can complete our overview on the existing Arctic capacities. So I hope we can count on collaboration in this. Yeah.
Roberta, that's a great heads up, and I'm happy that you're using IARPIC as a way to connect with people. What is the time frame that you're going to be seeking information over?
We will get ready this list in few days, and then we will leave 1 month. We think to leave about 1 month time to people from when we we invite people to answer to our questionnaire. But we will not make a general invitation. We will really address the selected observing system. Yeah, so it's March mostly.
Okay. So I guess I would say that if you are finding that you're not getting responses in the time frame that you need them, and it would be helpful to have some encouragement from the US side about what the Antaros project is and the value of getting our information in there. I think myself and some other people on the call would be happy to help advocate for that. Even, people are busy, and we want to respect their time, but if some context would help, then please enlist our support.
Thank you very much, Sandy.
Roberta and Hannah, this is Bill Manley with University of Colorado. And we'd like to help too, with the Arctic Observing Viewer. We share some common interests and goals. It'd be helpful to chat sometime.
Oh, sure.
I'll
I'd be glad. Yeah.
I'll follow up with an email.
Okay, any further updates from around the room?
Hi, this is Allison again. I was just on behalf of the Arctic Observing team. I wanted to mention that yesterday I sat in on the IARPIC Vocabularies and Semantics workgroup session, and there is interest in doing some work with the societal benefit areas as well as the essential Arctic variables. And I think we need to keep that on the forefront of what's happening with that group and interface with activities here in terms of metadata documentation and sharing that work with Antares and others in a pragmatic way that researchers can actually use.
That's great, Allison. I'm happy to hear that those are becoming some more convergent topics, because I think the data community just has a huge archive of information that we can take advantage of as we're moving forward with this. And you and Bill had demonstrated some of those capabilities in past meetings. So yeah, it's timely.
And to that end, there will be a hackathon focused on cryospheric terminology, probably at the end of this month. They're trying to schedule it.
Can you say more about that?
I believe it's the NSF Arctic Data Center is leading a training effort, which will also be attended by, or maybe led by, Pierre Luigi Butengeg, I believe, to examine cryospheric terminology and to look at doing semantic annotations for metadata. So they may go deep down into the rabbit hole, but I think what's going to come out of it will be useful to the community as an example for the cryospheric terminology. So I think it's going to be a couple-hour session. They were looking at February 28th, but there seemed to be some travel conflict.
Okay. Okay, good to know. Thank you. So just as a reminder, our agenda today is having these kinds of exchanges. We have a couple meatier exchanges on some topics towards the end, but don't be shy, because this is really what we set the time aside for today.
Sandy, in that spirit, this is Roberto Delgado from NSF. More of a reminder than an update. For those of you who attended the November meeting of this group, I presented on the Navigating the New Arctic solicitation. As a result of the partial shutdown, we have extended the deadline for proposals until March 4th. And I want to remind folks, I hope most of you are already familiar with that, that among the research focus areas, one of them is specific to observing. Reading from the solicitation, it addresses innovations in interoperable national and international Arctic observational networks, instruments and technologies, as well as shared and open data collections, as well as intelligent data management, analysis, and modeling efforts, and specifically as they address different impacts and opportunities at the intersection of the natural and built environments and social systems. So just make sure that, yeah, I suspect a number of folks, especially US-based researchers, are potentially involved in our proposals. We're very excited, looking forward to what's going to come in. If there are any last minute sort of questions, folks can still reach out. We have an email alias, which I'll put in the chat in a second, nna@nsf.gov, for those sort of lingering concerns and questions. So please don't hesitate to reach out if you need to.
Great, thanks, Roberto. Okay, Sarah, are you still with us? Ah, there you are.
Yes, I am. Sorry.
Sorry, unmute. There's the button. Hello, hello.
Oh, we've got.
No, wrong headset. Hello?
Siri, we can hear you.
Okay, good. Thanks. Yeah, sorry. So, are we just doing a roundtable or something?
Yes.
Okay, so where do I start? So I'm on the GEO program board, and the program board evaluates the GEO-GEOS work plan, and SAON has submitted the proposal for Arctic GEOS. I think probably most people in Telecom are aware of that initiative to bring the SAM implementation plan into the global context of the Group of Earth observations. Program board met a couple of last month, and that was and the discussion there was more about didn't focus on this. So the work plan is going forward. I don't need to talk any more about that, but in this context, I'm also on the Europe Polar Prediction Steering Committee, or the Polar Prediction Project Steering Committee, and involved in the Europe Polar Prediction activities, in particular the model in comparison experiments, where data from the observational sites is being collected and formatted and made to the extent possible interoperable with extracted elements from the various models, like from ECMWF and CCC. So I've been helping with that in the data portal that the data is supposed to be discoverable through. And then I'm on the Arctic Data Committee's semantics group. And well, I'll leave it at that for now.
Okay, great, thanks. So the next two updates, I think Hayo and I were going to take turns on because some of our other co-authors were unavailable. Hayo, I think we had said I was going to do the first one and you were going to do the second one. Is that correct?
Yes, sure, yep. Sorry, you're talking about, yes, yeah, you're right, yes, the first one, I'm the second, sorry. Go ahead.
Okay, and yeah, of course, feel free to jump in. Sarah, would you mind pulling up the document that I had posted? So we've been tracking this discussion really since even before the Davos Arctic Observing Summit within this group of people in preparation for the Observing Summit. Hayo and myself were co-chairing this group on implementation and optimization. And many of you on the call became quite engaged with this discussion, where we began to sort of practice with some different types of frameworks in order to see how they might help us meet the goals of understanding what an optimized observing network looks like and suggesting pathways to move forward on its implementation. We were, because the Arctic Observing Summit is an activity of SAON, and because many of us were already working closely with the SAON Committee on Networks, we recognized the strong relationship between what we were doing and the goals of, or I should say objectives of the SAON Committee on Networks, two of which are laid out in the center of the page there. The objective related to the societal benefit areas is very broad, but it suggests that it would be useful for more and more of our community activities to use societal benefit area frameworks to make some level of assessment of the adequacy of how well the observing systems are accomplishing what we think that they should be accomplishing in a big picture way, and how we can use that understanding to help us map into areas where there might be a real opportunity for some convergent coordination to better support one of the objectives, or to recognize maybe where one of the societal benefit areas is maybe not well organized and we need to do some kickstarting. And then the other piece, which is very related, is that in kind of doing these broad assessments of how the observing system is doing now at meeting some of these societal benefit areas, how can we take those recommendations towards more of a roadmap that can be used by bigger planning organizations, funding organizations, some of these international forums like the Arctic Science Ministerial, to help them understand, and importantly, I should say industry too, to help them understand where we think the most critical observing needs are emerging, what we think the maturity of those systems are, et cetera. And so this is really the heart of the discussions that we're having right now. It is at the heart of some things that SAON is keen to move forward on as quickly as possible. And so we met before AGU to try to bring a broader group of, in particular, US collaborators into this discussion, because we were at an American meeting, to refine what would be the scope of work for a task team under SAON to take this on, and ultimately to just try to kind of get more help for what we need to do. So Sarah, if you scroll down a little bit, and this document's accessible through the IARPIC collaboration site. I posted it, I think, a week and a half ago. You can see some of the topics. So about 20 people came to the workshop, which was really, gave us a really nice breadth of perspectives. We got through, or I should say we self-organized into these 4 breakout groups related to kind of fundamental stuff. How should the roadmap even be defined? We know we want to have a roadmap that has strong collaboration with Indigenous communities. What should we be thinking about now before we even get started so that we can do this right? The teams like Roberta's and the Arctic Observing Viewer team, they were really keen, and Hannah as well, the Antaros group, keen to point out that there's actually been a lot of calls for information. There's a lot of good resources we already have in place. And as we're moving towards something that might look more like a collective assessment system, how can we use the tools of the US and Europe and other partners to in a more synthetic way. And then we touched upon interdisciplinary science as well. And so the latter half of this document really concerns some of the findings that came out of that process and how we envision it moving forward as a task under SAON, which will probably also include having discussions in this venue moving forward. I won't walk you through too much of it right now, other than to say that we recognize that this is a task that's really going to cut across SAON beyond the Committee on Networks. I think the conversation that Allison and Srijota alluded to about the vocabulary and semantics is really telling about how important the data community is going to be in helping us address some of these challenges. And further, the SAON group, the funding task force, it has a funding task force called the G3. This is where a lot of the people who are really program managers and responsible for national and European level funding put their heads together. And we would really like them to spend some time on this question of what kind of roadmap is best going to help you do your job? What do you need to see addressed and answered in a roadmap as well? So that's sort of you could say the Committee on Networks is very interested in the assessment system. It's very interested in the benefit area tools. We know that we've got a great capacity to reach back into the data community to talk to them about what already exists. And then we're, of course, reaching forward into more of the funding group to say, how can we design something that's really going to be fit for purpose? So at the very bottom of the page is a draft task statement. This is an open opportunity for those of you who see yourself reflected in this kind of work to throw your hands in the air and find a role that you could play in helping us do this. It's largely going to be proceeding under the auspices of SAON. So that was a lot, and I'll pause there, and Hayo can fill in, and we have Jan-René Larsen on the call as well, who can perhaps fill in from the SAON side.
Yeah, Jan-René, do you want to add anything, if you have any comments?
Yeah, just to confirm what we just heard, that SAON welcomes and the CON welcomes the work of this group that came out of the Arctic Observing Summit, and that's that work on defining a roadmap. The first bullet that you see here has been brought into the mentioned task force, the task force as Sandy mentioned. We're now developing the scope of that task force to cover this roadmap definition and discussion part, trying to reach out to not only SAON entities but also entities working directly outside SAON, like INTARS and EU PolarNet, and try to put together a group that will work on the roadmap definition. As Sandy said, this definition is important for guiding our work and to attract the attention of funders and of private industry. We had a SAON board meeting last week, and I'm just preparing notes and invitations from that. So some of you will hear from me soon, and everybody who would be interested in this roadmap definition their input would be appreciated to this work. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Jan-René. I don't know if there's any other questions on this particular item. Otherwise, I could give a brief update on item number 2, Sandy. Is that okay?
Yeah, there's a strong relationship. So why don't we do that, and then people can jump back in and ask questions at that point.
Yeah. So and I want to be clear. What I'm reporting on now is an effort that either Craig Lee, Marie-Lise Timmerman might have been better qualified, in particular Craig as the lead author, to talk about, but they're unfortunately both committed at this time. So I'd just like to give one example of how we could see a conversation or even more specific parsing of activities as part of a roadmap proceed. And the specific example here is a community white paper that a larger group of collaborators, some of whom are on this call, submitted to the white paper call of the Ocean Ops 19 conference. So in September this year, Ocean Ops 19, it's a decadal meeting and basically a in some ways similar to the Arctic Observing Summit, a forum for the international oceans community to identify various issues of common interest and help move coordinated action forward. And the paper that Craig Lee is the lead author on, I sent a message on this, but I don't know, Sarah, whether you have a copy of that and can post that. But if not, I can just give you a brief glimpse of this. Topic is Framework for Development, Design, Implementation of a Sustained Arctic Ocean Observing System. And basically the paper lays out and puts into an overarching framework a couple of the central challenges that we see. One being that you have a range of observing activities already underway, and Taro's being an example, but there's a number of others. John Toole here is leading an effort that's been underway for a long time. So you don't really want to or need to redesign a network or a system from the bottom up. Part of the task is to just consolidate and create effective interfaces between existing efforts. And so the paper basically lays out a bit of a process that one could, and a framework that one could use to move that forward. We found it particularly useful to distinguish between observations that are relevant on strategic or planning timescales, which have different requirements associated with the specific variables, the essential variables that you're looking to observe. Observations that come in at the strategic level, less than decadal scale, both in the context of, for example, resource management or other issues, and then the tactics timescale, where you're really talking about those types of observations that may actually have to be made available in near real time for operators, emergency responders, and others, and the scientific community, of course, in terms of planning some of their work. And the paper basically then sort of lays out what different approaches would lend themselves using specific examples, identifying advantages and drawbacks in terms of design and optimization approaches under these three different headings. And Sandy then built on the document that was put together by STIPI, Science and Technology Policy Institute in the US in January of 2017, that sort of laid out a fairly well-defined set of societal benefit areas and completed a value tree analysis. And this paper now kind of takes the next step to start linking some of these different sub-areas of specific societal benefits. So for example, that might include disaster mitigation, it might include marine and coastal processes, it might include marine and coastal ecosystem biodiversity, and a bunch of others. And it starts to link those two groupings of the Global Ocean Observing System, GOOS, essential ocean variables. And that exercise that we've conducted with the co-author team, also in terms of, amongst ourselves at least, prioritizing some of these variables, that was quite interesting because it does yield a sort of a series of higher priority areas in terms of what needs to be observed. And we feel that or we're hoping that the Ocean Ops meeting itself and the broader conversation about the white paper, along with other Arctic relevant white papers, I think there's one or two others, are going to help the community move forward as a whole. So I'd encourage you to look at those white papers. Unfortunately, the process for Ocean Ops is such that you can't really, they're going through a process of review, but you can't really modify or merge papers down the line. So being part of the conversations at Ocean Ops itself, or setting up some forum for conversations, this group here might be a good one, might be important down the line as well. That's all I had. Thanks.
Yes, I know there's a companion paper that Greg Smith is leading that's very similar thrusts. So.
Yeah, and I should say, I mean, Craig actually has communicated with Greg, and my sense is, from what I've seen, is that those, because of that communication, might actually be highly complementary. And so Craig is in communication with Greg's group about how to take that further.
And it's a very unwieldy process given the tens of hundreds of authors. So
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Hi, Haya, would you want me to share the graphic that you mentioned? Would that, you think that would be helpful, or?
Yeah, I mean, why not? I think that would be great, because at least people then sort of know what to look for. But sort of my conclusion from all of this was that we are at a point where we can start to be a bit more specific about what needs to be observed, and be able to justify this in terms of what does the research community want, what do different agencies want, and in particular, you know, while Sandy's doing this, I mean, my reflections from the Arctic Science Ministerial in October last year were that the broader group of international countries interested in sustained Arctic observations, the organizations or agencies that are funding that in different countries, they just want to see a bit more due diligence on the part of the research community to give them assurance that making major investments into sustained Arctic observing are justified, you know, from the perspective of taxpayers or voters or different constituencies. And I think we're, you know, with the outcome from the Arctic Science Ministerial, we're getting there. So the graphic that you see now that Sandy has pulled up gives you sort of an idea of the types of links that you want to establish so that you can, for example, relate measurements of sea surface height, whether they come from satellite altimeters or bottom amount of pressure gauges or what have you, link them back to very specific applications where there is a clear need. And then from those applications like marine and coastal processes, for example, you would then in turn also derive some guidance on requirements that observations that want to be relevant in this context need to requirements that they need to comply with. So this next year or next couple of years, I think are going to be pretty interesting in terms of trying to zero in or narrow down and focus more on what's most relevant, and then hopefully see some you know, the different countries actually making commitments to supporting these efforts.
So questions from the greater group. You know, we've shown some examples of how the societal benefit areas might be used to help do some sense making within observing systems. I think this is one example from a family of many. It's a little bit of a different riff, but I hope that you can see how the first two, the topic that I presented and the topic that Hayo just presented, fit together in the sense of the bigger picture, and this being somewhat more in the application space or topical foci space.
I would just like to add that as a commitment to the Arctic Council chairmanship, Finland is actually organizing a similar exercise these days, and it will be presented to the ministerial meeting here in May. They are organizing a workshop actually in Finland the end of this month, where they have set up a similar graphical system that captures various observational services and data sets and link them to the same societal benefit areas. So it will of course be interesting to once these two pieces of work are complete, to try to merge them and get an even better picture.
Yeah, so here's the example from Finland, where they started on just the weather and climate societal benefit area. You can almost imagine that this should be transposed so that the societal benefit area is to the left if you were going to match it up with what I just showed, and then the observing systems are on the right. And so there's actually quite a bit of data underlying this presentation. What most of us who are working on these are moving towards are online tools where you can interact with the graphics to a greater degree, ask questions, and maybe even begin to play some what-if scenarios to understand the dependencies across the system.
Just to add to that, so Japan is actually contracting with STIPI to do a similar analysis, but specifically looking at what types of observations would further the goals that or priorities that Japan has set in their Arctic policy, which essentially is an Arctic marine policy, sort of recognizing that, sort of framed in the context of the Convention of the Law of the Seas. But that's an interesting effort, because that then will get to the point where you could see much more coordinated deployment of sensor systems in the in the Arctic, with individual countries laying out very clearly what they're interested in supporting.
So comments from around the horn. You've heard a lot from us about this today. What are some thoughts or reactions, or how might people see their engagement moving forward?
Sandy, this is Renee. I just wanted to ask if you can distribute the visuals that were posted so we can take a closer look.
In some capacity, I think so. The one I showed was a graphic from an article that's under review, so I'd probably have to just check with the author team to make sure that they're okay with that.
Thanks, Sandy.
Mm-hmm.
Sandy, if they are, I just suggest you put them as a comment under when we get the meeting notes loaded, and
okay,
they'll link directly. Thanks.
All right, I think we waited the 7 seconds. That means that no one has further to add. Sarah, the remainder of our agenda.
Yep, I just put it up, Sandy.
Thank you. Sally, do you want to speak to this, what the status is from the standpoint of the co-chairs on the meetings through over the next couple months?
I'm not sure that I know what our status is, honestly.
That might be it. I think it's...
Well, to be fair, to be fair to the team leads, we were supposed to have a team leaders meeting at the end of February in Anchorage, but due to the shutdown, we had to postpone that meeting. So we have postponed it to June. So the Secretariat is going to begin to work with each of the teams individually and do some webinars to get the team leaders together to think about their strategy between now and June. So that will begin to happen in the next week.
Sorry, Sally.
Yeah, definitely. No, that's all right. And DOE was not shut down, so I have no excuse, but I know with others being shut down and then catching up on all their work, it's been quite a challenge.
So we had, I think at one point, and maybe it's a good time to restate that because the societal benefit areas for this call have become a nice organizational tool, that if you're sitting out there and saying, gee, I really wish that they would pick one of these areas that is important to me and organize a meeting around it, I have some ideas, please reach out to us and let us know, because otherwise we tend to just sit around and come up with ideas like that on our own. So this is really a meeting where we'd love to see your ideas come forward and help shape the discussions.
You know, Sandy, the one thing we did have that we put on the back burner because of trying to coordinate it was a joint meeting with the data team. Was something that we were working on before the shutdown.
Yeah. And I think we heard a few good ideas today about how we could use that meeting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
And Sandy, I would just share that the modeling team team has a meeting, I believe it's next week, it would be on the events calendar, with the sea ice team that's coming up. I think it's on, I'll pull it up and share it with everybody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I was just going to say, if there's particular topics that, you know, the group is interested in us focusing on in a meeting, you know, feel free to let me or Sandy or Will, our other co-chair who couldn't be on today, you know, feel free to let us know if there's something in particular you'd like to see us address. You know, free to say it now or to contact us later.
Okay, I think back to you for the wrap up then, Sarah.
Sorry, I had trouble unmuting there. So I think that's it. I think your next meeting is March 20th and topics to be decided. And I believe that the environmental intelligence team leads are meeting this Friday to do some planning. So there may be some